Pagutovok, as you can see in the front page here, just express a tefillah for our brothers and sisters who are in Ukraine, and for that matter, those who have managed to flee the Ukraine are also in need of Yeshua. They should be, the Eibusha should help, they should have a Yeshua to go out of their difficulties very speedily.
Amen.
I'm going to first go to a question which I got from the Ukraine last Motzei Shabbos. So one of the shluchim sent me a picture of his children sleeping on the chest freezers in their basement, which they are using as an air raid shelter. And the children were asking about Tati, if we sleep on top of the food, so then the food will become have a ruach hatuma. So is it okay for us to sleep on the chest freezers? So he asked, obviously the circumstances, there's no question that it would be okay, but he was asking. Baruch Hashem, they're now in Moldavia, I believe, but at the time they were still in Ukraine. And I told him it's okay. And the reason which I said it's okay is because underneath the bed, by default, is a vacuum. It's a place where it's just a place for rubbish, etc. And because it's a vacuum, therefore it invites a ruach ra. But when the underneath the bed is used for something specific, so let's say it was a larder or something, there would be room to be more lenient about this. There is a shiur of the late Rabbi Five Schneebel. He talks about a baby's carriage, what we call in English a pram, and they have often a tray for shopping underneath. And he says that's okay, the fact that there's food underneath the baby sleeping. But meanwhile, I did find the following. I found there's a sefer which specializes in these inyonim, which is called Shmiras Haguf HaNefesh. And here he gave me a reference to the sefer which you have on the screen, which is called Azhoras Shabbos. So obviously from about 150 years ago, I presume. And he writes in the name of someone called it Rabbi Yisrael Broider, whoever that, I don't know who that is, that the idea which is of not putting food under a bed, which incidentally was in Rambam last week, I think it was Thursday's shiur Rambam. So he says, dafke underneath a bed. But if it's under a canapé, or under a schlafbank, so that's not a problem, because, and he takes a policy which I've always followed, but I'm pleased to see it in writing, that when it comes to something which we don't understand the logic, so that then, and we don't have a reason written, we only follow the literal psak, but if it's something different to the original precedent, which is addressed clearly, so then we can take a lenient view. I wasn't sure what canapé is, and then I looked up, I Googled the word, and I found out it's a French word for a couch. I'm still not sure what a schlafbank is. I know schlaf is sleeping, a bank is a bench, but I'm not sure what he exactly means. But under a couch, he's saying that since a couch is not made for sleeping the night, it's more for just relaxing. So even if someone did sleep on a couch, there's food under the couch, that would not be a problem of food tachas hamit, or under a bed. Let's come back to the first question, though, which I had put on the list. And whilst I'm scrolling, I had a call just about an hour before Shabbos from a shliach in Germany, that there's a group of Yidden who are crossing the border out of Ukraine on Friday night. And because it's Pikuach Nefesh, they're going on Friday night, despite obvious. And then they're asking the question. They have with them pieces of luggage, probably very little. But are they allowed to carry their luggage? They had to, at some point where they have to cross on foot. Cross through the border, they have to cross on foot. Are they allowed to carry their luggage? So what I told him, and I didn't have much time to think it through, but what I told him is, if they have, and he said that they do have food with them, and we don't know how long their journeys are, and the food could be actually a pikuach nefesh. It could be vital that they take that food with them. I said once they have food in the bag, and that food is pikuach nefesh provisions, so then anything else in the bag can go along with it because it has something. It's you have the redeeming factor of the food which is for pikuach nefesh. My cue I took from, there's a sefer from the Chofetz Chaim called Machane Yisrael, which he wrote for soldiers who were fighting in the First World War. And he says about the tefillin. Now, you're not allowed to be Mechal Shabbos to take tefillin with you. But he says they can, if they have in their knapsack where they have their pikuach nefesh stuff, and then they can take that tefillin with them, even though they're going to have to travel on Shabbos. So it's because it's in the one bag. So that's the psak of the Chofetz Chaim. So I use that same principle over here. So now I see on the chat about the question about under the bed. Would a bed with built-in drawers underneath be different and allowed to keep food? So I'm not so keen on it because it's a shtickle chiddush. So I would avoid doing so. But certainly in a shas hadchak and b'diavad, etc., one could rely on it. But lechatchila, I would not advise to put food in a drawer which is underneath the bed. In principle, I think it's okay, but I don't want to rely on it. Ari is pointing out that originally the night pot was put under the bed because they didn't have toilets inside their house. Yes, that would explain why it's invitation for Ruach Ra. We all know the last brayse in Gemara Sota, which talks about Nakius Mevia Ledetara or Tara etc. So the English expression cleanliness is close to godliness has got certain truth to it. That where there's a place of dirt, it's a place which is inviting Ruach Ra, and you can see that it's fairly consistent. I'm not going to discuss it too much now. Okay, so someone, a friend of mine in Melbourne, contacted me this week, and he's asking, we have here in the first print of the Alter Rebbe Sidur, which was discovered about 5-6 years ago, print of Shklov Samach Gimel. I think that's called 1703. So it has there in Shmona Esra, Ve'es kol minei tzvuasa. In the later prints, it's Ve'es kol minei tzvuasa. I wonder whether what prompted the question was the Kriyas HaTorah at the beginning of Parashas Pekudei. It's S and Ace and Ace and S. And so then you see there a discrepancy. The first print is Ve'es kol minei, and the later prints have got Ve'es kol minei. So he's asking which one is correct. Okay, fine. Meanwhile, Bashgocha Protis, this past week I've been working on the Sidur, and Bez Hashem almost finished the editing, and I just came across this point in the Broch of Nefashos. So here in the first print, which you have to the right of the screen, it's Al Kol Ma Shebarasa, and in the second print, it's Al Koil Ma Shebarasa. So Kol or Koil. So I want to explain something that as an amateur bear Balkaira, how do you know when it's S or Ace? So the answer is that when there is a trop, when there is a note on the word, it's going to be Ace. When there's no trop, then it's S. Now, typically, there's a word in Hebrew called makaf, which means a line like a hyphen. When it's S, it doesn't have its own tune because it is appended to the following word. So there will be a makaf. So although the Sidur doesn't necessarily have those symbols, V'es kol minei, it would have to have a line connecting the word V'es and kol. At least in the Chumash, that would be the case. When it's on its own, so then it's V'es. The same thing is with kol and koil. When it's on its own, it's koil. When it's appended to the following word, it's going to be kol dovor, etc., kol ma, etc. Before scrolling to the next slide, where we have here in the first print of the Alter Rebbe Sidur, in the davening of Rosh Hashanah. Ve'emoscho al koil ma shebarasa, and there's another, I've forgotten now, 2 lines later in the next paragraph, there's also al koil ma. Now, so again, this fellow in Melbourne is asking me, perhaps the first print is correct and the second print was a typo. This is his question. So when we know the history of the Alter Rebbe with Sidur, and we know that he really worked very hard on getting it accurate, and he perused. There's a sort of story of 60 editions of the Sidur, something. There's another version of 36, but certainly he did read the works of the master medactikim in his generation and just before his generation. So there there was a medactic who was a contemporary of the Baal Shem Tov, called Reb Zalman Henna. He was, as I've mentioned him before in the shiurim, he was a master medactic. He had his own chidushim, that's true. But in his Sidur, he has, it was called Sharei Tefillah. He has dikduk notes where he explains each of the changes. All right, so Reb Yaakov Emden goes to town to challenge him, but that doesn't take away from the genius and the mastery of Reb Zalman Henna. And he has the following. He explains why it should be ve'es kol minei also, and he says also it should be al koil ma shebarasa. And in koil ma shebarasa, he gives us a reference to what he discusses in al koil ma shebarasa in Shemona Esrei for Rosh Hashanah. Now, I just want to explain in simple English. If I say Jack lives in a large brown house, so large is an adjective describing the house. Brown is also an adjective describing the house. Between large and brown, there is room for a comma. It doesn't have to be, but there is. It makes sense. But because you've got two words which are describing the object, there's room. There's a slight pause. A light brown house. Okay. Sorry, did I say light? A large brown house. Yeah. Otherwise, light and brown would go together. But it's a large and brown is two separate things, and that's what he's saying here in the Reb Zalman Henna. When you have two words coming one after the other, and they're followed by a word which they are both describing, so then there would have to be a pause, and hence a tzere. Since ve'es kol is describing to also, and mine is describing to also, therefore there is a necessary kind of pause between kol and mine, and therefore it would be ve'es kol mine to us. Ve'es. No, sorry, between ve'es and kol mine. Well, all right, between ve'es kol and mine. So he's saying because there's so many words before the article, therefore there's a reason for a pause there, and because of that pause, it becomes ace instead of s. And that's the same thing. Koil ma shebarasa is a similar idea. So let's just come back to the previous slide. So although in the first print, in Shemona Esrei weekday and in Ber Nefashos, the Alter Rebbe did not include the change of Reb Zalman Henna, he did include that in Shemona Esrei of Rosh Hashanah. And what we do know is that the first print, the Alter Rebbe was not totally pleased with, and he made many corrections. The second print, there were 3 prints in his lifetime. We don't have the second and third in his lifetime. We do have this print, Tovkuf Ayin Vav, which was printed 3 years after his passing. But it makes sense that when we see a change, and the change has got a coherent explanation, so we're not going to say the change is because of a typo, but rather we're going to say that after the first print, this was advised that this has to be updated. On Wednesday, there was a beautiful chasana in Oxford, and Rabbi Eli Brackman, the Baal Simcha, he published a tshura, and one of the things which he points out is, I can perhaps just show it on the screen for a moment. He's showing you here where the Rambam changes the heading of a chapter. He changed it from Perik Shmini to Perik Ahad Osar or something. He changes the heading, but he doesn't necessarily update all the other chapters. So the Rebbe made this comment. It was a Sicha Shabbos. It was Sicha of Achron Shal Pesach, Tov Shin Mem Dalet, just when the Rebbe launched the idea of the cycle of learning Rambam on a daily basis. So the Rebbe makes this comment that when the Rambam updates it at one place, it doesn't automatically update all the other places where it should have been updated, but he left that to the copyist that it should be updated. And I'm using the similar idea. If in one place the Alter Rebbe did adopt the approach of Reb Zalman Henna, Al Koil Ma Shebarasa, although it wasn't necessarily updated consistently in the first print, but it should have been, and it was updated in the later print. That's as much as I can offer, and I'm quite happy to continue the way it is in the Sidurim as we have. Bichlal, we know that if you're not sure, you just stay ways in the Sidur, and that's, I'll do the job. Okay. So here I have a totally new question. This is written to me as a hypothetical question. That Reuven is traveling for his work. He's flying overseas. His trip is paid for by the company. Shimon is a friend of his, and he says, "You're going to that and that place. I have need for something to be brought from there. Could you bring it for me, and I'll pay you for the effort or for bringing it to me?" And Reuven brings the package, and Shimon pays him $500. I know $500 for a package is very suspicious. I don't know. That's not my problem. That's how the question was put to me. The issue was that the accountant, Shimon, perhaps unwisely, put the $500 into the work account rather than directly to Reuven. The accountant who's looking at these paid papers, I know we've got some accountants online, and they say, wait a minute, this money belongs to the business. The business paid for your flight. And therefore, the earnings which you made, the side benefits which you earned during your flight, should also belong to the business. So who's right? Reuven, who wants his money, or the accountant who says it belongs to the business? So if I don't have mamish that halacha, but we have a similar halacha, and this is in Shulchan Aruch Mishpat Siman Ayin Reish. Metzias poyel le'atzmai. I've hired a worker. Let's say he's a porter, a builder. I hired him for a day. I've told him, I'm employing you for these next 8 hours. Whilst he's working, he sees a purse, he sees a watch, a valuable watch. He picks it up. So the Shulchan Aruch says, he can keep it. The worker can keep it. The word being that I employed him to work, to do building or to do schlepping. The fact that he found something was not part of his work. So that's incidental, and it doesn't belong to the employer. It belongs to the worker. And I think the same thing would be here too, that when Reuven is in this other country, it's totally his choice whether to do this errand for Shimon, and he chose to do it, but it's nothing to do with the employer. That's the way I understand the halacha, and therefore the accountant should release the money. And how he's going to do it, well, that I'll leave to the accountant to work out how he's going to register it in the books. But meanwhile, someone asked me on Friday already. The notes went out. So he asked, "What is the story about airline miles?" Now, people who travel a lot for business have a lot of airline miles, and it's quite substantial. You can go on holidays with it, etc. Who do the airlines belong to? Airline miles belong to? To the traveler or to the company? So there's in Shulchan Aruch, Alter Rebbe brings it in Chesed Mishpat. What's the story if, let's say, a buyer for a company, he's buying for an employer, he goes to a wholesaler, and he's buying for his company, and the wholesaler gives him a bonus, gives him a gift. So obviously, he didn't give him the gift just because he's got a nice smile. He gave him a gift because you've spent money with me, and I want you to come and spend more money with me, and therefore I'm giving you a gift. So if he hadn't been spending the money, so then he wouldn't have given the gift to the worker. On the other hand, perhaps he's giving it to, because the worker had chosen to spend the money by him, not by someone else. So here we've got the Baal HaMois and the Baal HaRotzen, if we want to call it. And so the Shulchan Aruch remains, it's a shofek, it's a doubt whether the money, the bonus, the gift belongs to the Baal HaMois, the owner of the money, or the one who has the decision, who made the decision to buy here. And therefore we make it a 50-50. And so if you're traveling for business, but you have the choice which airline to travel with, and that the airline which you travel with offers you mileage in order to entice you to spend your money with them, all right, so then that mileage should be divided equally between yourself and the employer, because it's your choice on the employer's money. Let's move on to the next question. Oh, I hope we have the slide here. Are figurines kosher? So last week we had the discussion about those sculptures in the ceiling, in the cornice of some fancy place in France. And so this brought the question about people who, someone asked me, he has these figurines, and are they kosher? Are you allowed to keep them in their house? So let's scroll down to the next. We have some quote here. We're going to, before going into the detail, there's going to be a difference between children's dolls and those figurines. So let's go first. The first quote here is from the Maharit, Yosef Mitrani, Italian posek who lived about 400 years ago. Not sure exactly when. Prominent posek. He asks, what's the difference between, it says in Shulchan Aruch about making an image and me keeping an image, mali oyster, mali mekayim. And in Shulchan Aruch, it has, we had that on the screen last week, he says, also last is tzura lenoi. He says you're not allowed to make an image, a sculpture, for a decorative purpose. So he says, the hainu dover kavua. If it's something of respectable, something of substance, respectable, then there is a concern. People might think, oh, they have this image, and they might see it as they value it as some kind of for worship at all. But lafuke derech arai lefisha. But if it's something which is just ad hoc and not respected, not given a prominent place, it's just a play for playing with it, or just for teaching something, then people won't see that it's an article of worship. That the images which are made for children, for entertaining, for playing with, some kind of other form of entertainment. So he's saying, the Marit is saying that you're allowed to make dolls which are made for playing around. They're not prominent, they're not placed on a pedestal. They are left lying around, and therefore you don't have the worry of them being the suspicion that this is an image which is worshipped, etc. The next source which I have here is from the Chochmas Adam, who was a contemporary of the Alter Rebbe. So we have here that he's quoting the Halocho in Shulchan Aruch, that just like you're not allowed to make a sculpture of a person, you're not allowed to ask a goy to make it for you. Amir lenochri shvus, v'nirali the tzuras Adam bizman hazeh, a human image nowadays, you are allowed to hold on to it. There's no chashad, because nowadays no one worships a human image. There are images which are worshipped, but they're made in crude and grotesque or strange forms. But a normal human image would not be an object of worship. And he talks about the disciples of, I guess, of Yoshki. So he says, but an image nowadays is not an object of worship. Therefore, you are allowed to hold on to it. And because you can, how much more so if you made a damage to one of the eyes. Okay, so he's not totally sure because he also added something with the eye. So that's him. And then there's a sefer called Eshkol, a Rishon, and then their Eshkol is published with a commentary called Nachal Eshkol. So he says a similar idea. Suras Odom ein is ela ba'asiyah, and yesh lamed saneguria. With this, I want to talk in the merit of Chachma Yisrael, of the Chachamim, the Rabbonim, shleimichu ba'ashirei om. Why is it the Rabbonim do not protest about the fact that the wealthy people in the community, sheyesh lehem bechadrei maskiyos, they have in their fancy rooms, tanurim im tsuras odom boiletes. They have their ovens, the stoves, or their fireplaces, and they will have a human image on those mantelpieces or whatever, under the mantelpiece. He says that since the whole reason is mishum chashad, veloi hoya gzeira klolis, etc., etc. Bisman hazeh shafilu agoyim ein oivdim letzuras odom leka chashada. Nowadays, that people no one worships at tzuras odom, a human image, therefore it's okay. And then he says he saw that the Chochmas Odom says the same thing. So we do have poskim who do, how do you say, melamed zchus. They do allow the melamed zchus of having those images, but really it still remains the question: who makes these things? Even when there may be a heter to hold on to them, but then, so I called up someone who sells Judaica, if I pronounce it wrong, and I asked him, are these produced by Fruma Yidden? So he says, no, they're produced by these kind of images. They're produced by non-Fruma Yidden, and they're cute, and people buy them, and so they produce them. But really, making such images, I think, still remains highly questionable. And holding on to them is not like a doll which is lying on the floor. This is put in a respectable. So there are poskim who are more mekel, but I'm personally, I think a Chassidish Yid, Machmir, and so many other things. I'll tell you personally, I had a figure which someone I met on a hospital and started putting on with him, and he gave me a memento, a figure of like a crude thing made out of wood. I've had it for years, but now I went through this halacha and I felt ginuk, and it's somewhere outside in the recycle at the moment. So I'm really not so confident about these things. What I did manage to discover since last week, that the reason for not holding on to the images is mainly because of chashoda, because of suspicion, that people might suspect that you're worshipping it. And why I suggested to the prospective buyer of this property with this problem, if you would put in a suspended ceiling, so then those images would be out of sight, then the issue of possessing it wouldn't be a problem because there's no chashoda. Now, a few people have pointed out that in the Rebbe's room, there are some images, human faces. They're not whole; they are just a part of it, and possibly that's the reason why they were left there. But that's why, all right, fair enough. But here is a whole image, a whole body, and this is clearly what the Shulchan Aruch is talking about, that one shouldn't be making a whole image. So, yeah. Okay, let's go on to the next question. I've question 5, and now questions, no, that was question 4. Question 5, which I don't have any pictures, is someone asked me about mashed eggs or tuna. are you allowed to mix them with mayonnaise on Shabbos? And is there a permissible way to do it with a shinoi? So let me explain what is the shiur. The shiur is that one of the lamates melochas is losh, kneading, Kneading, and that is, you take flour and you add liquid, and that releases a stickiness. And then the flour becomes, because you added the water, now the flour now becomes a mass. So taking loose particles and now binding them into a mass, that is the malacha of losh, of kneading. So when you have mashed eggs, so you've got loose particles of mashed egg, and if you have them in a bowl, you tip the bowl slightly, tilt the bowl rather, and they would start tumbling out. If you mix in a reasonable amount of mayonnaise, they're going to be all bound together, bonded to whatever the word is, and it will not tumble out. It will hold them together. So you've taken particles and made them into a mass, and so you should not be using mayonnaise mixing with eggs on Shabbos. Similarly with tuna, flakes of tuna which are loose, to bind them together with mayonnaise wouldn't be allowed on Shabbos. Now, in the on the agenda, I gave a reference to the Sefer Shabbos Halocho from Rabbi Forkash, exactly where he talks about it. That's his psak. I recall reading the same in the Sefer Zocher V'Shomer, I think, on the notes. Rav Falk, Olav Shalom from Gateshead, he used to teach about the Lamates Melochis in the Sem there, and his notes, he also wrote the same. Rav Falk does note that there's a sefer called Nishmas Shabbos, who says it is okay, but he points out he's misunderstood the source which he's quoting, and that's the way I feel quite confident that should be the halacha, that it should not be okay, because you are taking particles and make them into a mass, which shouldn't be done on Shabbos. Baruch Hashem, we've got fridges nowadays, so this can be done before Shabbos, and it will stay perfectly fresh, I believe. Okay, let's go on to the next question, and that is, does a tub of hummus qualify for Mishleach Manos? So what's my worry? Now, this time it's my own question rather than a question of someone else. We're seeing if you get all these different advertisers, all different ideas of shlachmonas. It looks like you can give jewelry as shlachmonas, you can give, I don't know what, but we all know that shlachmonas has to be food. And a peeve of mine, a question of mine rather, can you do shlachmonas with a bottle of water? A little bottle of water with a challah. Is water called a portion? We talk in Poskim about wine, beer. But would you say a portion of water? Does such a thing exist? Or is it just, you have water as much as you need when you need it, if you have it? So I wouldn't think that a bottle of water, plain water, would count for a portion for shlachmonas. But now the question here is about hummus, or similar, it can be a jar of grain. It's not the kind of thing you eat by the spoonful, and therefore, is it called a portion? Because the word mishloach monos means portions. So does that count? So here we have a story in the Gemara in Megillah Dav Zayin. It talks, it's the top of the page, and it's talking about Matanos Lev Yoinim, and it tells a story of Rabo Shodar Le Lemori Bar Mar. Rabo sends a shlachmonas to Mori Bar Mar, Biyad Abaya. The messenger was Abaya. And what did he send him? Mole Taske de Kashvo. It was a whole bag of dates. Moli Kosto de Kimcho Dav Shoina. And a full cup, a jar of a kind of toasted flour, which apparently is tasty as is, like because it's been toasted. Omalei, so this was, now at that time, Rabbah was already the Rosh Hashiva, and the shlachmonas was a little bit low key. It was something not very fancy. So Abaya is the nephew of Rabba, and he was the messenger. Omale Abaya, Hashto Omar Mori. Mori, when he gets this shlachmonas, he will say the following. I'm putting words in his mouth. Ichaklo malko lehevi. People have this following phrase. If a peasant will become a king, dikulo mitzavore lenochis. He won't take the basket away from his neck. Like the peasant carries stuff on his shoulder, and now if a peasant becomes a king, he will be still addicted to carrying the basket on his shoulder. So what he's saying is, now that you're the Rosh Hashiva, why are you sending such a low-key shlachmonas? You should something more respectable. That was Abaya's comment to Rabba, to his uncle. Be that as it may, Hoder Shoder Leihu. In response, that's what we understand. In response, Mori Barmar sent with Abaya back a shlachmonas to Rabba. That's what we understand the Gemara. Mole tasko de zangvila. So here is a whole bag of ginger, or mole koso de pilpalto aricho, and a cup full of a jar full of long peppers. And Omar Abaya, so Abaya now commented, he says, Hashto Omar Mar, he's now guessing what Rabba's comment will be. Ano shadri le chulya. I sent him sweet stuff. He sent him dates, and he sent him this flour, which was sweet, as a sweet taste. And he's sending me back sharp stuff like ginger and pepper, which is sharp fruit. All right, this is the story in the Gemara. Now, that's on the right of your screen. On the left of your screen, you have a copy from a sefer called Reach Dudoim, and this is written by the Bnei Yisachar. Reb Melech of Vyazhensk had a great nephew who wrote his most famous sefer is Bnei Yisachar. He wrote numerous others for him. This is a sefer of his on Gemara Megillah. So he comments on this gift, this shlachmonas of ginger and pepper. Nishma the yoytzi yedei chivosim mishlechmonas afilu bedvorim sheino necholim beatzmam. Here we see that your yoytzi shlachmonas, even with a food which is not eaten on its own, rak asuyim le masek ma'acholim. It's made as a condiment for other foods. Pepper, etc., and ginger is not a thing which people eat on their own. It's used to flavor other foods. The salka daita chamino, one might have thought, mon is dafka haruyin lamachal b'fnei atzmai. And you might have thought that you can only give shlachmonas portions of food which are edible on their own. Who gankin also zeh, and he's suggesting that Mori Barmar chose this as his shlachmonas back to Rabbo, la'agmuri halocha l'maisa, kehoya abayasham. He wanted to teach the halacha that you can be yotze shlachmonas also with the pepper and with ginger. Obviously, they are usable without cooking; they're usable as they are. But he says that's so. On that basis, if you can be yotze shlachmonas as, let's say, a jar of grain and a piece of fish, so you're yotze shlachmonas with that. So the same thing, a tub of hummus together with a challah, let's say. So even though you don't eat hummus on its own, but it would qualify as one of two portions of food. Okay, let's move on. Someone asked the question about someone who's not fasting for some reason. Can he read the Megillah? And I feel there's no reason to hesitate on that. Let's just read from the Nite Gavriel. Also, lechel koydem kriyas Megillah. This is written in Shulchan Aruch. Afal pisha tain is kosher olav bein balayla bein bayom. You're not allowed to eat a meal before Megillah, whether by night or by day. Even though if fasting is difficult, you shouldn't eat before the Megillah. But then he goes on. Odom cholosh shatan is kosher loy. A person who's frail or the fasting is difficult for them. Mutter litaim pas pachos mekabetzo. They can have a bit of food or bread or biscuits, less than the volume of an egg. Kosher kain lishtes coffee or tea. Certainly to have a cup of coffee or tea. it's okay to have a little snack to have before hearing the Megillah. Befrata balkoire. Certainly the balkoire who needs to have the energy to lane, it's okay if they have a cup of coffee after the fast before doing the laning. There's no question that they can rinse their mouth before the laning. So that you see that there's no imperative that the balkoire has to be still fasting at night. So if for whatever reason he's had to break his fast for health reasons, there's no reason why he should not be able to lay in the Megillah. Okay, let's move on. So now someone asks me, one of our regular listeners, he's asking when you have kavonas for talis and talis cotton and tefillin. When do you have this kavona? Before or during or after the bracha? So, Baruch Hashem, people are concerned about when to have the kavona. Let's just take a look at what is the correct kavona. It's good for me to refresh my memory. You get used to things just doing them by rote. So you have here, this is for Alter Rebbe Sidur, it's similar to Shulchan Aruch. When you put on the talis, so you should have in mind that the Eibishter commanded us to put on the talis with the tzitzis to remind us of all the mitzvahs, as it says, or isam oisur zachartem. As the Rebbe mentioned many times, there are 3 mitzvahs where the awareness, the kavona, is not ma'akiv, but is part of the mitzvah, and they are tzitzis, tefillin, and sukkah. The Bach pointed out, I think, all 3 places that the kavona is part of the mitzvah, and here we have the mitzvah of tzitzis is isam oisur zachartem, to remember. What's his kavona with tefillin? You should have in mind that the Eibishter commanded us to write these 4 parshas, where it talks about Yichud Shemoi, it talks about the oneness of Hashem, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Echad, and Yitzias Mitzrayim. And when we put on the tefillin, those are the messages which we should be registering in our mind to remember the Nisim and Niflois, which are the miracles which Hashem did when He took us out of Mitzrayim. And those miracles are indicative of Hashem's oneness, that He has the dominion in the upper and lower to do as He sees fit. And Hashem has commanded us to put them on our arm near the heart, and on the head near the brain, so that we should subjugate the neshama, which is in the mind, and the passions and the thoughts of the heart, that they should be subjugated. And these are the kavonas of tefillin. So it's quite a mouthful, doesn't really work for a machshava, but it's quite a few lines there to think about. So now this Ingeman is asking, when is the time for those kavonas? So this is, as I said, this is in Alter Rebbe Sidur, which is Halocho. But then let's go down to see what the Alter Rebbe has. Go down? No, what's happening here? Here we are. So now in Tanya, Pirkei Aleph, the Alter Rebbe talks about the kavonas of mitzvahs, and he spells out Kamoy Lifnei Levishas Talis Tefillin. Talks about the kavona. He says it's emphasized before you put on. So it seems to be fairly clear that the kavona, the time for the kavona is before you're about to do it. Then you have in mind what are you going to do. And here further in Tanya, he goes into a detail about your mind, your chokhmah bina should be bottled to Hashem's chokhmah bina, and he goes into more details of the various parshas, and similarly when it comes to the tzitzis, have in mind to bring upon yourself malchus yisborech, malchus kol ilomim. So these kavonas are not identical to what was said in Shulchan Aruch, but what we do see is that kavonas is lifnei levishas talis tefillin. So the time is before you do it, and so generally that's b'chasidim bichlal. The inyan of hachana is always a very strong point. The preparation for a mitzvah, preparation for davening. So before you do it, then you stop for a moment. What am I going to be doing? Okay, let's move on to the next question. This is not on your agenda. This came in on Friday, but it's I think it's of popular application, so I wanted to share it with you. So this is a front door opening onto the street. And as you see, there's a safe, a key safe, right there with probably a number lock. You'll probably open the flap and there's some numbers there, and that allows you to take out the key and open the door as you're standing in the street. So are you allowed to use that on Shabbos? And so the answer is yes. Certainly if it's above 10 tefachim for sure, but I believe even within 10 tefachim, what I did point out is the following, that when you have a door open onto the street, so if you would put the key in the door, where you got the key, let's say you took it off your belt. If you push the door in, so now you've taken the key from the outside into the inside, into the Rishus HaYochid. You're taking the key from the Rishus HaYochid. Now, most of us don't have front doors straight onto the street. Many of us, though, do live in apartments. So you go on holiday, you may be in an apartment building, some resort, and there's no Eruv. So the corridor is a Carmelis, and your apartment is just a Yochid. So the same would apply if you're living in a building without an Eruv. So to put the key in the door and to push the door in with the key is an issue of, going to be a problem of taking from the Carmelis into the Yochid, which isn't allowed. So what should be done? You put the key into the lock. You push the door just an inch or two, whatever, just past the door jamb, whatever it's called, but it's still there's no, you haven't exposed the Rosh Hashanah yet, so it's still Rosh Hashanah. You withdraw the key, and then you put it back on your belt. You put it back into the safe in this case. So I think we've discussed this before, but not everyone was online last time, and you never know how it's going to apply. As I was refreshing myself on this halacha, I gave a reference. I have a reference. There's a sefer called Nesivas Shabbos from Rabbi Yankov Yeshaya Beloi. So he talks about it, and he points another interesting thing which I didn't notice before. Forgotten this. If you have the front door has got a porch, and that porch is more than 4 tefachim deep. So min haTorah, an area which has got 3 walls is a Rishus HaYochid. So you imagine, you say here, this front door doesn't seem to have a deep porch. I don't know the rest of the picture, but let's say there was a surround in front of the door, which is 4 tefachim deep, which is not very much. 1, 2, how much is it? It's 20. So and 32 centimeters, just over a foot. Now, if you would be standing in the street, which is Rosh Hashanah, and you put your hand with a key through the porch into the door, so you've actually taken your key from Rosh Hashanah into Rosh Hashanah. So we know that front porch, min haTorah has got a status of Carmelis, but min haTorah it's Rosh Hashanah. So therefore, you should not be taking your key from, as you're standing in the street, and putting it into this through this porch into the keyhole, because you're taking Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah. Therefore, instead, you'd have to, if it's a deep, as I say, if the porch is 4 tefachim or more deep, you'd have to stand in the porch and then take off your key and do what you have to, open the door and still do the same as just open the door, jams out just that little bit, and withdraw the key and then open the door. So I wanted to share that because it could be starting to get mice. Okay, let's go on to the next. This is from the as I said, from the Sefer Nesivas Shabbos, where he says if the mashkav is Rov of Anash, we have a problem. Okay, so that's where I got it from. Okay, let's go. Finally, last week mentioned 2 stories of the Rebbe, and I'm amazed how some of our listeners came up with the exact details when it happened and the details. So the details were not exactly as I had told them, although I told them the way I had heard them. But there's 2 stories. One is Tov Shin Chof, and one is Tov Shin Chof Tes. And so here you can see this was sent to me by Rabbi Glasman. but also a Rabbi Karasik in Kfar Chabad called me up to set me right exactly when these events happened. And here the story is the following. This is a diary from Vov Tevis Tovshin Chov, a few days after Hanukkah. And the fellow is writing the following. It was on Friday. It was on Friday, the second day of Rosh Chodesh Tevis. They called up the Rebbe for Revi. So the first three aliyahs on Rosh Chodesh are the aliyahs are in the Kriya of Rosh Chodesh. And the fourth aliyah, as a second Sefer Torah, is going to be in Parshas Nosoi. So they took out a Sefer Torah and they had rolled it to Bayom Hashvi, which was the correct day of Hanukkah apparently, but they had rolled it to Sukkot because Hanukkah, the Nisim, we read the Nisim, it's Bayom Harish, Bayom Hasheni, Bayom Hashlish, Bayom Hashvi, etc. And also Sukkot has Bayom Hasheni, Bayom Hashlish, Bayom Haravi, etc. And by mistake, instead of rolling the Sefer Torah to Parshas Nosoi, it had been rolled to Parshas Pinchas. And the Rebbe made the bracha, and when the Balkoyer started reading, then he noticed he made a mistake. And he was reading he should have read from Nosoi. The Rebbe motioned to Reb Shmuel Levitin to paskin what he should do, whether he has to make a bracha again. And Reb Shmuel said you have to make a bracha again. So the Rebbe started again from Baruch Ata, or he did not say Baruch Hu again. And one could hear during the bracha, as he said the bracha again, one could hear bechiyas, one could hear crying as the Rebbe said the bracha again. So that's that story. So it wasn't with the Shabbos Shkolim, it was on the Kriya of Chanukah, and a mix-up between that and Parshas, the Kriya of Sukkot. The other story with the mix-up of the Haftorah was in Tovshin Chavtes. It's published in the Toras Menachem Volume Nun Hey. Is that the Rebbe? It was, I think, also Shabbos Chanukah, and because when you have the Parshas Shavua and Chanukah, so Chanukah pushes away the Parshas Shavua. What happens when Shabbos Chanukah is also Rosh Chodesh? So which one dominates? Rosh Chodesh or Chanukah? So Chanukah dominates, but then there is the minig of saying the first and last posuk of the Haftorah of Rosh Chodesh. So again, the main Haftorah would be the parasha of Chanukah, whether it's Roni V'Simchi, whatever it was, and then also to say the first and last posuk of the Haftorah of Shabbos Rosh Chodesh. And the Rebbe didn't say those extra two psukim, and afterwards by the Farbrengen, the Rebbe complained, why did no one correct me? And he says, when let's say by Pesach by night we have a Haggadah, and you look in the Haggadah, it tells you exactly what to do. In his mind, the Rebbe explained, there is a concept that you don't jump from one Sefer in Novi to another Sefer in Novi. So the Haftorah of Chanukah and the Haftorah of Shabbos Rosh Chodesh is not in the same volume of Novi. Therefore, in his mind, he had an issue of not going from one to the other. But on the other hand, later the Rebbe says, by the Farbrengen, in the Luach of Koil Chabad, which is published in Shalayim, it says there clearly that you do say, after the Haftorah of Chanukah, you say the two psukim of Shabbos, of beginning and end of Shabbos Rosh Chodesh. And the Rebbe says, just like the Seder night, you look in the Haggadah, it tells you exactly what to do. Similarly, you should also be following in the Luach to exactly what to do each time when it comes, what to do at that time. And the other correction is that what happened afterwards wasn't. I said last week about Rabbi Yochanan and Gordon, so I heard that it was actually Yisrael Jacobson, and I'm telling this detail. It's perhaps valuable knowledge, which that the Hanholas Yeshiva would go into the Rebbe once a month. I guess they would have a briefing and they would brief the Rebbe perhaps on what's going on with the Talmidim, and the Rebbe would, there was once a month a meeting with the Hadolsa Yeshiva, and at that meeting, after this event in Tovshin Chavtes, so the Rebbe asked why didn't anyone correct, and Rabbi Jacobson said because the Rebbe doesn't make mistakes, and the Rebbe said, but Moshe Rabbeinu made a mistake, to which Rabbi Jacobson said, that was when Moshe Rabbeinu was angry, but the devil wasn't angry, and so so the story was as it was, but with the details are slightly different. Let's finish off. We have here someone's asking if it is still on the belt. I don't think the fact that it's still on the belt, we're going back to the key. I don't think the fact that it's still on the belt solves anything. It's still, you're not allowed to stand in Rishus HaRabim and stretch your hand over into Rishus HaYochid. The fact that it's on your belt, I don't think solves anything. You still have to do what I just said, open the lock, push the door an inch or two, and then withdraw the key and put it back where, on your waist, etc. Someone is saying that the picture does not appear to show a door opening onto the street. I was also looking at that picture. It looked like a front door. It looks a bit flimsy for a front door. The letterbox is on the outside. I don't know. All right, listen. This is what I received, and as Rabbi Chazan of Manchester would say, let's not spoil a good story because of some facts. Okay, I wish you all a good tavoch, and we should hear Besuras Tovis, especially from Achenu Bnei Yisrael who are b'motzer in the Ukraine. Should have a Yeshua, Kroiva b'Tov Hanira v'Nigla. Good tavoch.
Good luck.